And we're still looking at this first assessment objective for A-level students, which is AO1, and it's all about articulating informed, personal and creative responses to literary texts using associated concepts and terminology and coherent, accurate written expression. This is a video today where we're going to continue looking at the use of terminology, but what we're going to look at today is what is often or commonly confused terminology, and we're going to look at mood, tone, voice, the narrator and the persona. Now, these are words which a lot of students mix up. They use the wrong one. They might call mood tone or tone mood, or they might just use these words generally to express a whole range of different things in a text. But they do have specific meanings, so I'm going to cover them in today's video, because what you don't want to do is to use terminology but actually find that you're not using it correctly. That in some ways is worse than not using it at all, because it actually speaks to the examiner and suggests you don't know what you're talking about or writing about. So let's have a look. Let's begin with this concept of mood. Now, mood is quite simple. It's really just the atmosphere in a piece of writing. But atmosphere is created by the way the writer describes the setting. For example, in The Signalman by Charles Dickens, the railway cutting is described as a dripping wet wall of jagged stone excluding all view but a strip of sky. I spent about an hour looking for an image that I could put with this quotation. I could not find an appropriate image. I could find a dripping wet wall, but it wasn't made of jagged stone. I don't know. I just thought we'd put the quotation up, and you can picture in your head, you know, what atmosphere does this quotation create? Well, I think it creates an atmosphere of fear and unease. A wet, dripping wall is unappealing to the senses, and the fact that the stone is jagged creates a threatening image in the reader's head of harsh angles and pain. And at the bottom of the cutting, all you can see is a strip of sky, creating the image of being sort of buried alive or trapped or sort of claustrophobic. So when you study a text, examine how the mood changes, and tone can also change with the text, but tone is slightly different to mood. Tone is the writer's attitude towards the subject and to the audience or the implied audience. So an obvious example, or not obvious, but an easy to understand example comes in Jonathan Swift's A Modest Proposal. Jonathan Swift is the guy who wrote Gulliver's Travels, but he also wrote A Modest Proposal, a very satirical work, very interesting to study. I've actually got a video on it somewhere in one of my playlists. Just search for Mr. Bruff Satire, and I go through it in quite a bit of detail. Basically, what he writes a very formal piece of writing that is ironic and contemptuous in tone, and he suggests the Irish children should be cooked and eaten in order to reduce the population. And you have, this is just one quotation: "I've been assured by a very knowing American of my acquaintance in London that a young healthy child well nursed is at a year old a most delicious, nourishing and wholesome food, whether stewed, roasted, baked or boiled." Now, this is an example of tone, because cannibalism obviously is illegal and immoral, so the reader knows that he doesn't mean what he says, but the underlying tone is one of contempt for politicians and the hypocrisy of the wealthy. They have the means to help the Irish poor, but they do nothing about it. So we've done mood and tone. So mood is the atmosphere in a piece of writing, often created through the description of setting. Tone is the writer's attitude towards the subject, and we can see that quite easily in some examples, but sometimes it's not easy to spot. You've got to really think carefully about that. The next one is voice. Okay, so tone is specific and usually changes within a text, because the purpose of writing a text will change. You know, as a writer maybe writes a different novel, they might have a different purpose to write it. But voice is more general. A writer's voice is the writer's personality, style, and general attitude towards the world. So Sylvia Plath was an American novelist and poet, and you may well be aware of Sylvia Plath. Some of you will be studying her for A-level. She suffered from depression and ultimately committed suicide. And knowing this helps us understand her voice, which might be called that of a victimized daughter, wife and mother. It's her voice that is generally applied to all of her works, rather than a tone which might just be a specific tone for a piece of writing. And finally, persona. If the text is fiction or poetry, the narrator might assume another person's identity, and that's called a persona. So in My Last Duchess by Robert Browning, he writes from the persona of the Duke of Ferrara. He isn't the Duke of Ferrara, but he writes in that persona. So as I say, these are some of the terms which are often misunderstood. As it's all in the ebook, so please do pick up the ebook at mrbruff.com or on Amazon. And yeah, please subscribe to the channel. There'll be more A-level videos coming soon.